It's obvious the 1979-80 season was going to be one of the biggest in NHL history with the four-team merge with the WHA. But what led up to it was this excitement at the first ever NHL entry draft because it was no longer amateur. Held at Queen Elizabeth Hotel, and an amazing 81.7% of those drafted managed to play at least one NHL game. Just tremendous amount of talent, a lot of machinations. It was delayed a couple of months as well to uh, put it this way, determine the talent. Now, the first NHL entry draft changed the league in more ways than one of the league's previous 16 amateur drafts. More than 2 decades after it took place, the players taking this draft are still regarded as the greatest pool of talent ever available to NHL teams in 1 year. Again, prior to 79, no more than 78% of the players picked in 1 year had ever reached the NHL. It is almost certain that the stunning record set in 79 will never be broken because not as many rounds, and I think that at this time it was what he called the strong 10. Now, in terms of available talent, the 79 draft had some big advantages over its predecessors. In fact, it was really two drafts in one. For the first time since 74, the NHL allowed the drafting of underage players, and we say underage, we're talking under the age of 19. Now, those who would reach age 20 in their draft year. This draft also included the influx of underage players to the WHA, which the association had merged with the NHL in the spring of 79. In its final season, the WHA had signed numerous teenagers, and the development had been accelerated by our opportunity to enter pro hockey so early. The WHA factor was a major reason the NHL had to change the name of its draft from the amateur draft to the entry draft. With 8 WHA players eligible for it, it was unfair to label it a selection of amateurs, so the NHL changed the name. The NHL knew it had to let all the players who had spent 79 in the WHA come into the league regardless of their age. This created particular problems for the two key players, Wayne Gretzky and future superstar Mark Messier, who had played the WHA as 17-year-olds and would normally have been too young to enter the NHL in 79. Messier with the Stingers and, of course, Gretzky with the Racers and the Oilers. Now, in Gretzky's case, the NHL avoided a draft dilemma by letting Edmonton retain his rights of his WHA franchise. Messier, however, was coming from a defunct WHA team, again the Stingers, and had to join a new one in the NHL. But if Messier was eligible at age 18, would that mean all 18-year-olds would have to be eligible as well? Now, the NHL struggled with the question of underage eligibility. A debate over this topic, plus the busy agenda for the 79 June meetings, forced the league to postpone the draft for the weekend of June 10th, 79 until almost the start of training camp in August 9, 79. This gave NHL officials an extra 2 months to settle the eligibility issue, which would require the blessing of the NHLPA as well as the key players in major junior hockey. To make matters worse, the NHL found itself under outside pressure from agent Art Kaminsky, who insisted that client Tom McCarthy be eligible for a draft or he would sue the NHL. McCarthy was not due to return 19 until the end of July, so by waiting until August, the NHL was able to draft him as a 19-year-old rather than an 8-year-old. But drafting in August also meant that the NHL would be holding the latest draft in its history, another record that has all been certain to stand the test of time. Now, finally, the issue was settled when the league agreed to allow the drafting of 19-year-olds in 79 with the promise to widen the pool to include 18-year-olds in 1980. To placate the junior leagues, the NHL agreed that drafted 19-year-olds would be returned to their junior teams if they did not make the NHL on a training camp. Now, this comes under antitrust. Basically, can you control a player by two organizations rather than one? No underage NHL player was allowed to be sent to the minors without permission of a junior team. Underage players were also allowed to join Team Canada or the U.S. Olympic team, although only the college players chose this route. Of course, 1980 Olympics around the bend, and key players like Glenn Anderson and all the Americans were in the mix. Now, in the final analysis, the NHL selected 53 underage juniors directly out of major junior hockey, plus the 8 players from the WHA. All eligible players who were not drafted were given the option of signing with an NHL team as an unrestricted free agent or returning to junior and re-entering the draft in 1980. NHL teams, however, had to sign underage free agents prior to November 1st, 79, otherwise you would re-enter the draft. A total of 31 undrafted players, including Dino Ciccarelli, Tim Kerr, J.F. Sauvé, Ron Flockhart, Dave Pichette, ended up signing with NHL teams for the 1980 season. As with draft picks, once a free agent signed with an NHL team, he had to either be kept on the NHL roster or remain with his junior squad. Now, the 79 draftees were also the first players required to wear helmets in the NHL, under a mandatory helmet rule passed during the summer of 79. Former WHA players were exempted from the helmet rule because they had played professionally during the 79 season. The draftees were immediately kept busy as teams rushed to sign them before the opening of training camps on September 15, 79. Some teams opened their rookie camps as early as September 9th, meaning draft picks had only 1 month to sign in order to report to camp on time. Because of the short lead time before the season, the draft was limited to 6 rounds for a total of 126 players. For the first time in history, teams were not allowed to pass it around and re-enter later in the draft, nor were they allowed to sell draft picks on draft day. No teams passed and no late-round picks were sold, making the dawn of a new era in draft history and a primary tenet of the draft as we know it today. Now, all amateur players born before January 1st, 61, and any younger players who spent the 79 season in WHA were eligible. Teams drafted in reverse order of the 79 finish, with the 4 WHA expansion entries drafting at the end of each round. The order in which Hartford, Winnipeg, and Quebec drafted was determined by drawing unrelated to the expansion draft positions. Edmonton drafted last since he retained Wayne Gretzky. Rotation included Colorado, St. Louis, Detroit, Washington, Vancouver, Minnesota, Chicago, LA, Toronto, Pittsburgh, Buffalo, Atlanta, the Rangers, Philadelphia, Boston, Montreal, the Islanders, Hartford, Winnipeg, Quebec, and Edmonton. Only 6 rounds. They also paid a lump sum to the CMHL to support Major Junior as a whole, as the NHL were told they had to compensate for any players taken. Teams could also offer player contracts at any time after the draft. However, underage players would be required to spend the 1980 season with their major junior teams. They did not make their NHL teams out of camp and would only be available for emergency recall. Now, how it worked this season, ladies and gentlemen, it was a very, very strong draft. Now, one of the followers of the channel, because I did the 83, said, who was the winner of that draft? I think the big winner for me had to be Boston, because with the Ron Graham trade getting him number 8. But here's the teams that passed on Ray Bourque, ladies and gentlemen. You tell me if they're not the big losers of this draft. Colorado, St. Louis, Detroit, Washington, Vancouver, Minnesota, Chicago. Now, Hartsburg, Vive, and Gartner were taken by Minnesota, Vancouver, Washington, respectively, so you can't really say they're losers. But in the draft, ladies and gentlemen, 4 of the first 6 players taken were WHA, what they call bonus babies. Now, Tom McCarthy, the controversial one, was taken number 10, and some good players in the first round. You had Brian Propp with Philadelphia. I think it was a good draft. Dwayne Sutter with the Islanders, Michel Goulet with Quebec, and Kevin Lowe with Edmonton. So that was a strong draft for everybody. Now, the second round for me, the big winner of the second round was Montreal, taking Gaston Gingras and Mats Naslund, and of course Winnipeg picking up Dave Christian and Dale Hunter to Quebec. Now, the third round, I'm just going by rounds who I consider would be the draft winner. Another good round for Montreal, as Carbonneau was taken 44th overall, but again, the big winner was Mark Messier. So would you believe 47 drafts before he was taken? So Messier was a big winner of that round. And another big winner as well, in my personal opinion, is Minnesota. They had some strong picks in every round. They had Kevin Maxwell that round. Big winner of round 4, of course, is going to be Detroit and Edmonton with John Ogrodnik and Glenn Anderson. Poplinski by Calgary or Atlanta, 75th overall. And Anton Stastny by Quebec in the would pick number 83. 89, Dirk Graham coming in, quite interesting for the WHL, and the overall picks, Alan Howard in Buffalo, like I said, a very strong position player. But ironically, the first 5 rounds pretty well at 100% making the NHL. It was only in the 6th round where you would find some threadbare picks. So Ray Bourque again in the Ron Graham trade. We talked about that already. It's just kind of bizarre. They would give up. LA would give up a number 1 in such a deep draft. But in 1978, there was no indication that the WHA was going to join the NHL, and that's what it is like the NHL draft picks is like a poker game. Look at Slakowski with Montreal. He thought he was a bummer, and this year he's coming across. So ladies and gentlemen, that's the story. In my opinion, the greatest NHL draft of all time, 1979, for the machinations and drama and the WHA entry. If you like what we're doing here with our draft history lessons, let us know with a like, comment, subscribe, or share. Bye.